last, moving on to the incident at Chili's. You were initially at Chili's when Officer Bonifaire was setting up the wire, correct?
Well, we didn't set it up at Chili's. It was in a different location, but yes.
But you were there for that?
I was there when he was setting up the vehicle for the undercover officer. I was there when he was setting that up, correct.
And that's Whitey Jean?
Woody Jean, yes.
Woody Jean? Okay. And I guess at that point in time, it was discovered that the wire for Mohammed Shiade was malfunctioning?
That's what I was told, yes.
Okay. And at that point, you returned to the Boynton Beach Police Department station?
Yes, I did.
All right. And upon returning, did you speak with anybody?
Yeah, I went to notify Sergeant Sheridan of the situation with the electronic device failure.
And can you describe that conversation?
Well, I entered his office and I told him, Paul, are you aware that the wire for the informant is not operational according to Bonifaire? And he said, yes.
And what did you say?
I said, well, we need to get one.
And what did Detective Sheridan say?
He said, we don't need to, don't worry about it.
All right, and what happened after that?
I told him it would take me a short amount of time to call the sheriff's office of Del Rey to get one because it's really important we have one.
How did he respond to that?
He started to get angry.
Specifically, what did he say to you?
At that point, he said, it's my investigation. I have it.
Did he use any, let's say, swear words when it goes to his...
Overruled.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Did he use any expletives or swear words when...
At one point, yes.
What did he say to you?
He had just told me it's my effing investigation.
Okay. And was anybody else present for that?
Yes.
And who was that?
About 6 detectives, a couple other personnel.
All right. And at that point, or shortly thereafter, you returned to the Chili's location?
Well, then I got in my surveillance vehicle that I was assigned with Sergeant Bonifaire, and we took a surveillance position, which would have been northwest of Chili's.
All right. And from when you first learned of the malfunction of the wire for Mr. Shihade to when you returned to the station to when you returned to the Chili's and surrounding location, is it fair to say that about 2 hours passed?
Well, I would say anywhere between an hour and 2 hours, yes.
All right. And in that time, would it have been practical to get a wire to record Mr. Shihade from one of the surrounding departments?
Yes, it would have.
All right. And just one further question. In regard to that wire, is it also proper Boynton Beach protocol to have an informant wired when speaking with a suspect?
Yeah, we're going to have an informant being used and directed by us for any type of case. We should have control of it and record it, yes.
And is that also to ensure that the informant does not go rogue?
Well, yeah, like I said earlier, it's to validate the investigation and the just cause by the department and to make sure there is nothing being said or done that we're not aware of.
And in light of Detective Sheridan not getting that wire or allowing you to get that wire, we have no idea what Mr. Shihade said to Ms. Dippolito during that 45-minute meeting?
No, we do not.
One moment, Your Honor. And did you ever confirm that it had malfunctioned aside from what you were told?
No, can you even confirm it by testing it or something? No.
Yes.
No, I do not.
All right, nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Hi, Mr. Ramsey.
How you doing, sir?
Good. How many prior solicitation to commit murder investigations have you?
I'm sorry, I actually missed what you said.
How many prior murder for hire investigations have you investigated?
This was my first.
How many prior murder for hire investigations have you done anything with relation to it?
This was my first.
How many prior murder for hire investigations have there been in Boynton Beach that you know of?
There was one.
And when was that?
I think it was in the 80s.
And you had nothing to do with that?
No, sir.
Okay. When Mr. Shihade was around there, was around the Boynton Beach Police Department making control phone calls and you guys setting him up, was he allowed to speak freely with people, with other officers?
Not to my knowledge.
To the other officers that were there at the scene?
He was under control of a Detective Marino,
okay,
and he was controlling him. So I wasn't standing around seeing Mr. Jihadi talking to anybody in particular other than Marino.
Okay. Was he preventing him from talking to anybody?
Not that I could tell.
All right. Did you ever see Detective Marino manhandle him?
What do you mean by manhandle? Control or
Physical.
physical? No.
Did
Not
you
at
ever
all.
see him threaten him?
No.
I said, first, did you ever see Detective Marino manhandle him?
No.
Did you ever see Detective Marino threaten him?
No.
Did you ever see Detective Marino get up in his face?
No.
Tell him, you're going to do this the way I want it, or I'm going to do something to you.
No, I didn't observe anything inappropriate from what I ever saw, no.
And in fact, you never saw any other officer ever threaten Mr. Shahade at any time.
No, I did not.
Did Mr. Shahade appear to be scared when you were talking to him?
The initial interview, he appeared concerned for the welfare of who the victim would be and the likeliness that he may be implicated if he didn't report this.
All right. So his thing was not that you guys were scaring him at all. He was worried about the victim and maybe his responsibility for if the victim ends up dying.
That is correct, yes.
The equipment that is used to record the phone calls, have you guys ever handed that equipment over to an informant or even a witness on the street and let them take the equipment home?
Yes,
And why do you do that?
because sometimes you can't be with them all, 24 hours a day, and they're going to go 3 days later, you're on your days off, as long as they have the recording device to handle that phone call.
And how does it set that up?
How does the
How does a
device work?
person use it?
Well, it depends on what they had in 2009, back in the old days with the little suction cup and, attach it to the phone. And otherwise, with the day of digital recorders and cell phones, you would just hold the digital recorder to the phone and you'd listen in that way.
How was it back then?
I believe it was a little suction cup in the plug, but I can't confirm that.
Okay. How many non-drug investigations have you had where two people that were close to each other and constantly communicating, were you involved in an investigation?
Very, very few, if any.
How would you prevent the defendant from contacting Mr. Shahade?
You couldn't prevent her. You would just control the informant by stating, if she calls you, don't answer the phone, call me immediately, meaning call me, and then I'll tell you what to do. Exercising some control of the informant is what I'm stating. You can't prevent the phone from ringing, but we want to control him from answering it and saying things or, making any statements that we don't understand or control or direct.
Okay. Did you ever, when you were ever around, did you ever hear Mr. Shahade say that he didn't want to go through with any of the recordings?
No, I've never heard him say that, no.
Outside the scope of cross, he's touching on the other motion now.
Overruled.
Wait, which motion are we on?
Motion to dismiss or in the alternative for instruction on spoliation.
None of this is relevant.
Oh.
Which motion did you believe us to be on, Mr.
I
Rhodes?
thought this was on the second to the last one they filed, Judge, that I got Sunday.
You have to tell me what second to the last means.
It was
The motion is suppressed.
motion to suppress the calls.
No, we're not on the motion to suppress at this point. I mean, I don't know what evidence is going to be offered on the motion to suppress yet, but we're not on the motion to suppress.
Do you know if Mr. Shahade was ever threatened by anybody at the Boynton Beach Police Department that he would be prosecuted if he didn't cooperate with you guys?
Objection relevance. This goes to the motion to suppress, Judge.
Not entirely. It does in part, but you're also making issue of the fact that there was no recording of the initial meeting between Mr. Shahade and the Boynton Beach Police. So it would be relevant that there was nothing that came out of that which would be of concern, so I'm going to overrule the objection. I think it does overlap a bit with the motion to suppress, but it has some relevance to this motion also.
Do you know that after initially talking to Mr. Shahade, they actually sat down with him and recorded it the same day?
Yes,
Okay. Is that standard protocol?
yes.
Did you ever answer that question about anybody ever threatened to prosecute Mr. Shahade?
No, I mean, sorry, I didn't answer because of the discussion, but
Okay.
no, I've never heard that, no.
Have you ever heard of any time that Boynton Beach received a recording of something related to this case and they destroyed it?
I've never heard that at all.
That's all I have. Thanks, Judge.
All right, redirect.
Mr. Ramsey, you were not the lead investigator in this case, correct?
That's correct.
That would have been Detective Sheridan?
Well, he was the lead supervisor. Detective Alex Marino was the lead investigator with Detective Brian Anderson.
All right, so you weren't always with Detective Sheridan, Detective Anderson, or Officer Marino, correct?
That is correct.
All right, so it's possible that threats were made about prosecution when you weren't there.
Again, if I'm not there, anything's possible.
And because you weren't always there, the destruction of evidence is also possible.
Anything is possible.
And in regard to the unrecorded phone conversations, would it be fair to say that if you have a confidential informant, they receive a phone call, and they don't have a recording device, the better practice is to let it go to voicemail and then come back to the department and make a call with officers around?
Well, when you say better practice, we're not talking about the informant because they don't have any practice. That's why we have to control them.
Correct.
The better practice is to have control, then, meaning discussed, debriefed, stayed in contact with your informant and told them specifically, if the phone rings, do not answer it and call me immediately. That would be the most you could do. You can't control them otherwise if you're not physically present.
So if this was your investigation and you were in control of Mr. Shihade, you would have advised him not to answer those calls and to call you immediately.
Correct.
All right, and the state touched on your experience with murder for hire investigations. In regard to confidential informants, is it fair to say that the policy to control an informant is the same regardless of the crime?
Yeah, we have a use and control of informant policy in the Boynton Beach Police Department, and it applies to all situations.
And that doesn't change if it's a murder for hire or a drug case, because you have to make sure he's not doing anything such as threats.
Correct.
And you've heard of in all your years of experience, you've heard of a controlled buy before?
Yes.
You've heard of a controlled investigation?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that this is an uncontrolled investigation?
I can't make that judgment from what I saw on my end, witnessing with my own eyes. The investigation went the way it was supposed to. I'm learning these things after the fact. I wasn't present for what you're discussing with me today.
Would not having recorded phone calls and not getting a wire to ensure that Mr. Shihade was recorded during the meeting at Chili's be an uncontrolled investigation?
That would mean they lost control of certain segments of the investigation. I would agree with that.
So this was a drug investigation. That wouldn't be a controlled buy at that point when you're
No.
at Chili's?
No, it wouldn't.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Okay.
That's one question I forgot to ask him.
Yes, and you'll have redirect, Mr. Rosenfeld.
Were you present at Chili's when they had the meeting between the defendant and Mr. Shahade?
I was out on a surveillance point, yes, sir.
And were you able to see the defendant enter into Chili's?
Yes.
And were you able to see her exit at Chili's?
Yes.
Did you notice anything with her demeanor that was different between exiting and or entering and exiting?
No, the demeanor going in and out appeared the same.
You didn't see, she didn't come out appearing to be very scared or upset, like someone just threatened her life?
No, I did not.
Thank you.
Redirect.
Just briefly, you weren't able to see her the entire time when she was in Chili's?
No, just the entrance of the main doorway, that was it.
And obviously, as you've testified, you didn't hear the conversation?
No, I did not.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Okay, you may step down, Detective.
Thank
Thank you. Is your next witness here?
I don't believe so, Judge. We can take a break from this hearing and...
Who is your next witness? What's her name, or his name?
I believe Officer Bonifair would be next. Or pardon me, Sergeant Bonifair. If we can take a 5-minute break or 3-minute break?
Well, we'll just go to another motion.
Sure.
Yeah, okay, so we're gonna, all right, we'll come back to this. All right, is there, with respect to the motion to suppress, is additional evidence going to be offered, or are you relying upon the evidence that's been presented to date?
Well, the state has the burden in this, in that it's a motion to suppress. Your Honor indicated that last week.
I didn't say they had the burden. It depends on the nature of the motion to suppress. What I said was they may want to call witnesses. I'm not sure I spoke about the burden of proof, but
Based on Gutierrez, it does mention at one part in the case that the state didn't meet their burden by a greater weight of the evidence, I believe, which would mean that they do have the burden in this case, Judge.
well, let me just ask the state, what do you want to do on the motion to suppress?
Well, Judge, you allowed us to rely on previous testimony. The only thing I actually had to add was, because you determined the credibility of Mr. Shahade when he testified, Detective Moreno already at the motion to dismiss. So these are duplicative issues from that I thought.
Well, if the argument, if the evidence relates to whether or not Mr. Shahade was coerced in order to giving consent, I've heard evidence on the issue, which appears to be what defense is relying upon. But I'm not certain. That's why I want to kind of flesh this out. I mean, I've heard him testify already, so I've heard testimony. I was under the impression that when you indicated it would take 10 minutes to argue, that we were just relying upon the evidence that had been presented. My comment to Mr. Williams was, unless the state has additional evidence they want to present on the issue.
I have one little piece of additional evidence to present, Judge.
What is that?
This is the August 1st recording between Mr. Shahade and the defendant. It's the defendant after the defendant gets out of the car. Mr. Shahade's riding back to the police department to go return the equipment, and he's talking to his friend on the phone, and he describes to the friend why it is that he is actually.
This is after the recording in the car.
It still keeps going, so because the recording's continuous. So that he leaves the
Right.
Mosul gas station, he's driving back to the Long Beach Police Department, and on the way back he receives a call.
So it's a recording in part, or it begins as a recording of that which the defense is seeking to suppress.
We'd object to that for pretty obvious reason, Judge. In our motion, we're not debating that he knew he was wired while in his car. He didn't know there were video cameras while in his car. So while in that, while driving back to the Boynton Beach police station, he is talking. There's no dispute about that. The dispute is whether he knew there was a video camera. So of course he knows he's wired and he's making comments. This isn't going to show anything that we're...
Wait a minute. I thought your motion was, I want to make sure I understand the motion to suppress. I thought the motion to suppress was based on the fact that, not that consent wasn't given, but consent wasn't voluntary. That is, that there was coercion with respect to the consent. I thought that was the issue.
Correct.
Well,
I guess there's two issues in the motion. The first one would be that his initial consent was involuntary. The second part, or the second argument would be, even if Your Honor finds that the initial consent was voluntary, he necessarily withdrew any consent he had given by telling Boynton Beach countless times, through what you see through his deposition, his perpetuated testimony at the previous trial, and even part of his testimony at the motion to dismiss, that he told them he did not want to be involved, he did not want to be wired, he did not want to be recorded, he did not know there was a
I've heard all
camera.
that evidence before, but I guess the question, you're objecting to this, a portion of this tape being played. I'm trying to figure out what the objection is to the tape. I'm assuming, but do not know, that the reason that Mr. Williams is proffering this is to establish what he was discussing after he left in order to basically rebut any statement or concern that he was coerced. If he's freely talking about it, if he's acting like, it went down according to what he understood was going to happen, that there's no evidence that he was coerced. I'm assuming that's why they want to play it. I don't know.
I mean,
I don't know what it's, I've not heard it. I don't know what's on it.
I could be wrong here. My